So I want to welcome and thank you all for joining today's panel discussion on foster care, youth justice, and the criminal legal system. My name is Michelle Mason, and I am the Policy and Operations Associate here at the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution. To stay up to date with all the upcoming events and panels, please follow our socials at IIP_JJAY. It's now my privilege to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. For time's sake, I'm going to keep the bios very short, and I will put a link to each of the panelists' full bios in the chat. Drop that now. And I encourage you all to check them out, and we are so lucky to have this group of experts who are being so generous with their time. First, I'm happy to introduce prosecuting attorney Carol Seaman, who serves as the prosecutor for Ingham County, Michigan. Next is Susan Mangold, who is the CEO of the Juvenile Law Center. We then have Victoria Davis, who is an activist and founder of Sisters of Justice organization. We are also joined by Shawana Vaughn, the founder of Silent Cry, Inc., a New York-based nonprofit organization that takes a holistic approach to aftercare for mass incarceration, gun violence, and trauma. And finally, we are joined by Aisha Lee Watson, musician and advocate who has done extensive work with the Juvenile Law Center. Now it is my pleasure to turn it over to today's moderator and my colleague, Shauna Salmon.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you everyone for joining us for this discussion today. Since we are limited on time, let's dive right in. My first question is for you, Sue. With over 50% of children in foster care being arrested, convicted, or confined in a correctional facility by the age of 17, it's clear there's a connection between foster care and the justice system. Can you explain some of the factors that underlie this foster care to prison pipeline?
Yeah, thanks for the conversation today, and thanks for that question. We often hear about a school to prison pipeline, and I think this, the terrible results of the harm that we cause to young people and families and communities with our, what we call our foster care system, results in some of these really tragic statistics that you just shared with me. And I think there's a lot of things that we can look at. There's education. Well, the first thing, of course, is separating a young person from their family, often from their community, and the harm that that causes, and especially if they're separated from other supportive adults, from siblings, and all the trauma that that causes to a young person who then may continue to live in unstable placements. And you know, I serve on the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Neuro and Socio-Behavioral Science, and we talk a lot about the kinds of positive interventions that can put a young person, no matter what they've suffered earlier in life, on a positive trajectory toward adulthood. And we talk about negative experiences that can actually affect the anatomy of the brain and put a young person on a much more challenging trajectory. And so much of what we see in foster care, sort of disconnection with supportive adults, unstable educational placements, failure to provide consistent health care and meaningful mental health care treatment, stable adult relationships as they prepare to exit the system, and really preparing young people for employment readiness or an educational program that will work for them when they exit the system. All of these are challenges that set any young person up, and certainly young people who have been separated from their homes and are living in out-of-home placement for challenges as they transition to adulthood, and the kinds of numbers that we see then of unstable housing and homelessness, dropping out of school, unplanned pregnancy, and as you mentioned, this tragic movement into the adult legal system are just some of the consequences of that earlier experience in out-of-home placement.
Thank you. And to follow up on that, my question is for you and Ishali is, how do race, sexuality, and other identifiers exacerbate the foster care to prison pipeline?
I mean, I'm gonna start and then turn it over to Ishali. At every stage of the system, there's a disparate impact. So kids, the surveillance of families, so there's more reporting, there's disproportionate indication of reports, there's disproportionate removal of young people, there's disproportionate length of time in foster care. Every negative statistic disproportionately impacts Black and Brown youth and their families and their communities, all as a result. And gender identity, especially as young people age in the system, is one that the system is uniquely poor at dealing with, and can really set young people up in school and in relationships without the kinds of supports that they need to feel comfortable with their own identity and share it with people who can support them and be around them as they continue to progress through adolescence as the person who they are. But I'm going to turn that question over to Aisha, who I think can give a much deeper response.
Hey, yes. So race, gender, and sexuality all plays into everything, like youth getting adopted, the type of foster parents you get, and how they treat you. Some people show you that they're in it for the money and not caring for you and don't support your sexuality or gender identity. And it can cause youth to run away and potentially lead them into the justice system. Or there are dynamics like going into a home and the family or siblings mistreat you, hurt, like if something happens physically or else, and can lead you into the justice system. Often youth accounts of abuse in these homes are not believed and they face the consequences.
Thank you for that. I actually want to open up and allow Victoria or Shawana if they want to respond to that question also.
Okay. So repeat the question one more time.
Of how race, gender, sexuality, and other identifiers exacerbate the foster care to prison pipeline.
Oh, absolutely. As someone who's been a product of the foster care system, knowing that every home is not bad, but the system in itself is an atrocity. And it's exacerbated. Like I was born in prison and vendor to the foster care system, and at 17, back to prison. And so we always say a broken system. No, it's not broken. It's working just the way they instructed it to work. So it definitely exacerbates. And I always say, how do we reconstruct this broken system? Because or reconstruct this system to be better. Why do we have to take kids out of homes? Why are we not trying to figure out ways to eradicate the foster care system? It's not that it's not needed. It's just not needed in the form that it is here and it has been here. So that's my take. I just don't believe that foster care is the first line, is to take away people's children.
Thank you for that, Shawana. So I'll jump in and answer as well. So I am also a former foster youth who aged out. And I wanted to say that I believe that race and gender does play a role for males 16 to 24, between the ages of 16 and 24, are more likely to die from gun violence. Foster youth are exposed to violence and violence in their community more often, and they are preyed on more often, especially youth living in group homes. The lack of housing and resources are one of the reasons why when former foster youth age out, that these statistics still exist. And I'm just trying to be quick, guys, I'm sorry. And also there's one thing that I think that we don't speak about enough is the foster care system stating that children are AWOL. When a child doesn't feel safe in a placement that they have, and they're trying to explain that to the social worker, and the social worker isn't hearing them, they are put as AWOL, and so there's a warrant out for their arrest. The over policing of young people and young people in foster care, especially young people living in group homes, is young males, when we're speaking of gender, in group homes are more likely to be targeted, put in gang databases, because they are seen as moving as a gang when they're really just a group of boys living in a facility together. And they're exiting the facility together because more often than not, the social worker placed them in the same school, the same activities. And when the police see them gathered, they are placing them in a gang database, and they are labeling them as gangs, which also feeds them to the prison pipeline.
Thank you for that. My next question, which is related to what you're saying, Victoria, is to prosecuting attorney Seaman. As a prosecutor, how do you balance understanding one's experience and potential trauma in the foster care system with holding them accountable for their actions, especially for those who have already aged out of the system? Can you separate those two aspects, or like how do you take on that process?
Well, certainly, excuse me, I've had laryngitis. It's changed over time. So I've been a lawyer for almost 41 years. I first became an assistant prosecutor in 1983, and it was pitiful. I don't mean me personally, the system, because the lawyers did not have, none of us, the judges, the children's lawyers, myself, we had no training in bonding and attachment. We had no training in child development, psychology. Trauma was not a word that was being used in that context at the time. We learned some procedural fairness things. So, for example, using the Indian Child Welfare Act, or some other of the legal tools, but there was very little understanding. And one thing I can think of with horror now that we did was we split SIB-ships up. Well, first of all, we removed kids that didn't need to be removed, but we split the SIB-ships up and we moved babies around like they were baggage, because the idea at that time was, as long as you had a safe, warm house, it didn't really matter so much if you were a baby. So there were a lot of just terrible things that good people who cared about children were doing in the foster care system that obviously we've learned through things like the adverse childhood experience research, which did not come out until after I was no longer an assistant prosecutor, and all the things we've learned about listening to the voices of those in the system. I love the idea of nothing about us without us, that we really need to hear from people who are involved in all parts of the system what their issues are. Now, I've gotten off on a tangent, sorry about that. There's an inherent tension, I think, sometimes between trying to hold someone accountable and also really be aware of and taking into account trauma. It's easier within the juvenile system, typically. A part of it is the expectations that victims and others in the community have about what the criminal legal system and the juvenile justice system should do. And if you think that the most harsh sentence or the most harsh treatment, like a residential care or terms of probation or being detained at the youth center, is the answer, that's what justice is, then it makes it very difficult to really focus on alternatives. So when talking with victims and others, I like to really focus on what they need to say, because almost always victims need to be heard, or survivors of homicide victims need to be heard. They need to ask the question, why did I get picked? Or why did my child get picked? How did this happen? And then they usually want to say, I don't want this to happen to anyone else. And then that kind of gives us a starting point to talk about what the different options are. And with juveniles, for example, we often transfer juveniles to the adult system. It's called waiver in Michigan. And we know about juvenile life without the possibility of parole and other ways of approaching it. So we want to talk about the rehabilitation focus, and I like to bring that into the adult system as well. And I guess I'll just say, One of the things that I've learned coming back as the elected prosecutor in 2017 is that I have to be really willing to disappoint people, because frankly, people on all sides of the spectrum, more progressive than me, more law and order than me. I alienate people every day, and not intentionally, but I have to be willing to say, no, this is what I believe is the right thing to do here, and I'm taking the heat for it. So sometimes that means I'm saying, no, I'm not sending this kid to adult court, because look at their history. Or I'm not asking, I don't like to ask for life without the possibility of parole in any case, certainly not a juvenile, things like that. And you have to be willing to have people picket outside your building and things like that, like I have, because it's so important to understand and to make sure that the people who work in the court now are exposed to the kind of training that I did not get when I was a young assistant prosecutor. It just wasn't out there. I make sure that my staff gets it. We do cross-professional training with judges and children's attorneys and parents' attorneys and things of that nature as well.
Thank you. I want to go back to something that Victoria mentioned, which was whenever youth who are in foster care run away from their group homes or their foster families, or if they are lumped into gang databases just purely based on who they're around, there seems to be an over-reliance on law enforcement whenever these issues, especially behavior issues, crop up. In your view, and I'm going to pose this question to everyone, what are some alternatives that can be utilized? And I'll start with you, Sue.
I don't know, Victoria had her hand. Do you want to?
Oh, sorry, Victoria, you can take this first.
No worries, and thank you, Sue. So I think that there is one simple, there's many solutions, but I think one simple solution is really educating and being honest about the impact that foster care has had, especially on Black communities, Black and brown communities, but Black communities especially, and destigmatizing all of the things around foster care so that we can humanize people who have been ward of the state, people who have been removed from their homes. I mean, I myself personally, I've heard some very disgusting things, or I've heard people say, you were in foster care? And I was like, what does a foster child look like, you know? And so the expectation is so low, right? And then when those expectations are so low, what does that mean for a child who is aging out of foster care? And also when a child is aging out of foster care, they go to like kind of like a seminar, kind of like an inauguration almost. I've sat on those panels. I was asked, not to speak of Black Lives Matter. And I was also asked not to speak about my brother who was killed by the police, right? And I was like, that's a little odd, right? So silencing the voices of people who are former foster youth and allowing them to have open dialogue and answering real questions to give real resources to people who are aging out is extremely important, because we are not yet at a place in society where people humanize former foster youth. The minute that they hear that you have experienced foster care, they immediately have all of these stereotypes. And so I truly appreciate John, Jane, you all for allowing this discussion, because this is long overdue.
Whoever has any follow-up or response to that.
I absolutely, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carol. I definitely have to agree with Victoria. Being a foster care child is very interesting, because you go to school and you say it and it's like a bad word. And you notice that the world treats you differently when you acknowledge, oh, foster care. And they're like, And I'm like, how do I make this normal? How do I make this look like it's okay? And so currently, I'm clear the foster care system is not the greatest, But like I said before, it's not every home that you go to that's traumatic. It's not every experience in foster care that's traumatic. And some people need to be in foster care, but it's how are we looking at foster care? And how are we making others view it? You know, and I'm grateful for this conversation because it has to be a community conversation. We have to normalize that every home is different, and foster care is a place just like any other place. But I think in this country, we look at foster care like we look at prison. That's why there's a pipeline, because we are feeding foster children into mass incarceration. And the world is looking at it bleakly because that is how they are setting it up from the beginning, foster care to prison. I mean, we just watched in Atlanta where 16 foster kids were rescued by the feds because the judge fed them to the group home that was sex trafficking them. So we have looked at foster children who are Black like we look at prisoners who are Black as 3/5 a human, and people are dehumanized. And so because people are not really looking at this as a state of emergency, and I always say it, even in mass incarceration and foster care is the same. If we were talking about dogs and cats, the SPCA and the Humane Society would be up in arms. But because foster care is fostering minority children, everybody's dismal and everybody's complacent because it's not their children. If the rate of African-American children were white, foster care would become a state of emergency. And we would exacerbate the money to radicalize and change it. And so because that's not happened, this is what it is. And so I currently stand with Victoria in this fight daily. And I just finished this week legislation. I just finished my first foster care bill. And I have meetings on Thursday with Michigan legislators to introduce foster care legislation. This can't be the norm. And people who are affected by the thing are going to have to be the people at the table writing the legislation. A politician is not, unless they've been in foster care, you don't know the depth of my pain. And you going to ask a college student is not helping me. I know that you need quantitative data. I'm more than data. And unless we're at the table, I don't think there should be conversations. Unless we're part of the solution, I don't think we should even, there can't be a solution without us. And so
sorry. One of the things that I think Sue mentioned and also Victoria was that once the scrutiny is on you, and if you're in a community, a Black or brown community or a community of poverty, then the scrutiny is always there. And once you're in the foster care system, the scrutiny is definitely there, whether you're the parent or the child. And that means that if you are absent without leave, I think it's or AWOL, or if you do anything that normal kids do that are developmentally pretty appropriate, maybe talking back or, pushing the door too hard and it damages the drywall or something, you're more likely to get petitioned as a juvenile, right? So now you came out of foster care, and because you're being watched, behaviors that would not have necessarily resulted in any kind of action at all are all of a sudden criminal. So I think that's something that is we really need to keep that in mind as we do this. And Ingham County is only about 12 or 13% Black, but I saw back in the 80s when I was prosecuting both adults and juveniles, there was no question that every single court hearing was disproportionately Black. And so that really started to affect how I looked at things. And actually, the last job I had before I came back as elected prosecutor was with an organization looking at race equity and child welfare and juvenile justice systems, because we need to keep going back further and further to find out where does the school to prison pipeline start? Where does the foster care to prison? Where does the lack of adequate, health care or transportation or job opportunities or parental incarceration? How do all those earlier factors just kind of create a template where someone is frankly almost guaranteed. I mean, I used to be able to say if you lived in a certain neighborhood, oh, that was blah, blah, blah. You just kind of expected it because there was not an investment in saying, we identified a problem, now we're going to do something about it. That does not involve the criminal legal system. Thank you.
I put a resource in the chat, which our youth advocates call the Roadmap to Reform. And it, if you can imagine, you can go online. I put the link there. Imagine a road with ramps, and you talk to a young person and say, okay, at this juncture, when this happened, what might have been an exit ramp that would have prevented this next deeper involvement or, transfer over to the legal system or whatever to have occurred. And so part of my response in terms of what could we be doing to prevent this is to ask every young person in care to do something like this. Like, what is it that you need to help you so that the road ahead is a positive one, as opposed to asking in retrospect, okay, something terrible happened, what could we have done? And I think, Aishali, did you have more that you wanted to add to respond to this question?
Yes. First, I feel like kids need to be treated like kids, and their needs need to be addressed. We can divert them or honestly address the underlying issues and get them in programs or other things to meet their needs. Police can't solve social problems all the time.
To pull on that, Aishale, what are some services that would be useful for children who are in the foster care system, but also people who are aging out of the foster care system?
I feel like, wait, sorry, repeat that one more time.
What services would be helpful for those who are in the system, who are already in the foster care system, but also for those who are aging out?
Services that help them first get jobs and able to not have to do things to lead them into the juvenile justice system. Because like I said, kids a lot of children don't get to be children. So they have to make a way for them and their family. So they do certain things and then lead them in the juvenile justice system. So things that, or like athletic things, like a lot of kids like to be athletic and all that and still do other stuff.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
I want to say that one of the real quick, that one of the things we have to remember is that the people who are closest to the problem are the ones who likely can address it. And, as lawyers, social workers, professionals, judges, we tend to tell people how they should get better, how their life should look better. And it's very arrogant, even if we don't mean to be. And so having the community really involved and like I say, this kind of plan saying, what do you need? It may not be what I think they need or what the judge thinks they need or the probation officer thinks they need, but what do you really need? What do you identify as services? And then maybe let the community actually provide that as opposed to having a governmental employee do it.
Victoria, you had something you wanted to add?
Yes, I definitely agree with Aishale and Carol. I think that is so true. And allowing the foster youth to have a real voice. I know that's what the guardian litem is there for. And, just allowing them to have that real voice. And then also understanding all of the nuances and the issues that can arise in foster homes, group homes, and all these things. I just wanted to highlight, it was something that I should have said, and I'm so sorry, I forgot exactly what they had stated, but it brought something to me. Ma'Khia Bryant, an example, over policing of foster youth, right? And then also the foster care system failing her, right? While she was asking for help. And I think that if Ma'Khia Bryant's death at the hands of police didn't open everyone's eyes to the foster care system and how these cries for help are being handled, then I think that we're not there yet. I watched her younger sister speak about her making that phone call and no one heard her. And foster youth and former foster youth, it doesn't matter how old we are, right? We go unheard the minute someone hears foster youth. It's like you have no agency. You're not a person. You are a property, just like Shimona was stating, right? And you know, that understanding that Ma'Khia Bryant's death is a direct result of the way that the foster care system handled the grievances of that young lady, that child. That's what I should have saying. I'm sorry. Seeing Black children as children. Ma'Khia Bryant was a child. We watched on social media as people ripped apart this child and adulticized her. And Black little girls are usually seen as adults by the age of 7. And for Black boys, it's even younger, right? And that is dangerous. And so people, you know, I think we just have a lot to do. And I think that Ma'Khia Bryant is a place that we can start, because the foster care system failed her. Her sister asked to be removed from that home over and over again. And they were she was attacked by adults, and she had no choice but to defend herself. That baby is now dead. And it was adults who continued to say that she deserved it. And she didn't deserve that. She deserved to be moved to foster home or another home or placement where she can feel safe. Her and her sister didn't feel safe, and no one heard them.
Thank you for bringing up that very important point, Victoria. Prosecutor Seaman, what I want to follow up on is, before you were talking about how back in the day, trauma-informed care wasn't necessarily at the forefront of any sense of prosecution. How are you now incorporating that into how you are handling youth justice cases? And also, what I want to tack onto that is, research shows that a large portion of youth, especially girls, are human trafficked during their time in foster care. And this point is especially salient given the criminalization of sex work. Your office has developed a way to support juveniles who've experienced trafficking through the Phoenix Court for Juvenile Prostitution. Can you discuss that initiative along with how you're taking a trauma-informed approach? That was a lot, but
that is a lot. I'll just meander around. So first of all, we needed to recognize it. That was what the huge part of the problem was. Human trafficking as a terminology didn't exist until this century. So it happened. I look back and see that there were cases that I was involved with that probably involved trafficking, but we didn't have our radar out. It's sort of like domestic violence before the 60s or 70s. The radar just wasn't out there. So we look for ways that make it safe for a young person to talk. You know, again, that means whether you're talking about abuse you're having in the foster home, what your parents are doing, you know, your gender identity questions, racism, your tribal affiliation, that it has to be a safe environment. So attorneys need to be trained. I keep saying that. I mean, it's great if caseworkers are trained, but, you know, CPS workers, but people who represent children in the juvenile court or the foster care system, the judges, the prosecutors, we need to know what to even be alerted for. It's like any behavior that we're not focused on. When I first started seeing self-injurious behavior like cutting, I thought that was a suicide attempt. We didn't know that reflected a release of tension or trauma by the person doing it. We didn't know. So that's one of the most important things, I think, is that we really have to be willing to be uncomfortable, to agree that we've done things wrong at times, and to learn together And for the prosecutor, that means pushing back if a judge is recommending doing something that we think is just really wrong. It means that I do generally, I've done some transfers to adult court recently because we did raise the age, which I support, to 18. But we had a couple people who were already in the adult system. So, but generally we should really be looking at all the factors that mitigate before we make a decision. And if we do look at how trauma is reflected increasingly, we know that if you're traumatized as a child, you're more likely to become, a juvenile, get involved in the juvenile justice system. You're more likely to get in the criminal justice system. You're more likely to have children who have issues. And I've already, I forgot your question, you went off. Oh, so the Phoenix Court, we have a couple different specialty courts. Phoenix Court is for children who are at risk of being trafficked. Some of them have been. We have a couple boys as well as girls. We do not prosecute for prostitution, generally at all, even for adults, very, very rarely, because most people are victimized in one way or another. And really, the specialty courts we have in our juvenile system are also for parents with substance use disorders. The focus really is saying, what supports do we need? My county has had two programs that I don't believe anyone else in Michigan has for a long, long time that I think are a good idea. One is called intensive neglect services, and the other is intensive probation services. Intensive neglect services is maybe a petition's been filed, but the child is not placed in foster care, but there are intensive services to support the family, not just the child. And there's like separate support groups for them to really address the issues. With intensive probation services, that's similar, where there's a more focused, it's trying to avoid institutional placement or residential care, might involve a group home. But it really is saying, what are the needs of this individual and this family? Because one thing that we haven't said is that most children, even if they come from neglectful or abusive homes, are pretty tightly bonded to their family, healthy or not healthy. They're run away and go back to mom or dad, or those things are all things we have to recognize so that we build them into our response.
Thank you for that. I want to turn to you, Sue, and get your perspective on the relationship between human trafficking and the foster care system, and how your experience as on the defense side with that situation.
So at Juvenile Law Center, we do a whole variety of things, but we're not public defenders. So we don't, so we're not in the position of representing an individual young youth who's being prosecuted for human trafficking. Is that what you're asking?
No, more of your experience with people who have been in the foster care system, who have also been trafficked, and what that has looked like, that perspective from the work that you've done. Mm-hmm. Sorry, not from a defense side. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just didn't want to claim expertise I don't have. I think all of these really tragic outcomes. So there's the kind of, system horrors like Shawana was describing, where young people in the people employed by the system are engaged in human trafficking. That's one sort of criminal aspect of what can go on. But more generally, young people are vulnerable because they don't, and that's a tough word, because these young people are also really self-reliant and self-preserving and know how to negotiate to make it through as best as they can. But they're susceptible to people who will prey on them and provide them with, different kinds of access or opportunities, and then it's tied to a trafficking ring or some other sort of criminal ring. And these are young people, adolescents, teenagers who get caught up in it. Then there's also the issue of young people who, when they transition from foster care, engage in what we call survival crimes or survival offenses. They may shoplift, they may engage in prostitution, they may sell drugs. And we can't be surprised that people, especially teenagers who are desperate, will make very, very, difficult decisions to survive. And then the question goes to people like Carol who say, we don't prosecute these cases. We try and figure out sort of what to do. But it goes back to the first question that you asked me, Shauna, like when young people don't have stable housing, when they exit the system, when they don't have supportive adults, when they're not job ready, when their education has been disrupted, when they've been, their relationships with their families, if not severed, have really been stressed. Bad things are going to happen, in more cases than we would certainly want them to. And human trafficking and, sex trafficking is just one example of many. Being on the streets and being homeless sets you up for all kinds of horrors. And one of them is sex trafficking, but it's a symptom. It's an aspect of this problem. It's not the only aspect of this problem. It's one that maybe shocks people in some ways, but it shouldn't, because it's all part of this same system that we've set up, so that young people aren't prepared for a successful transition to adulthood.
Thank you for that. And Victoria, I know that you said you have a response.
Yes, I wrote them down, so I'll just say them in bullet points. So thank you so much for that, Susan. And domestically, children who are trafficked, foster youth make up the larger number of those children domestically, right? And the lack of body agency, whether it's from not being taught or we're not teaching it as a practice, is part of it. The lack of housing, definitely. And people are engaging in survival sex, right? And so that's a lack of body agency. That's the need and will to survive, right? Because now they've been put in a position where they have to make adult decisions and they're just children. I also wanted to highlight that when foster youth are seen as pretty much throwaway people or people that no one cares about, predators lurk around group homes looking to recruit from group homes. I had a conversation where people thought that traffickers were looking for children in a white van. I said, they're not looking for your children in a white van. They're looking for children in group homes because they see them as throwaway people. And it's imperative that we continue to have conversations about foster care and humanize foster youth, because they're so vulnerable because of that thought process. And lastly, I know that there was the STARS program through the federal government. I'm not sure if they tackled foster youth. A lot of people who are recruited into sex work. Now, I want to be crystal clear. Sex work is work. If someone chooses to do sex work as an adult with their own agency, that's fine. If someone's being recruited because they were preyed on by predators lurking around group homes, that is an issue. And how do we train group home staff to look out for that sort of behavior? And children aren't only being recruited and preyed on for sex work, they're being recruited and preyed on for gun violence, because there's a misconception that children under a certain age will be charged as children instead of adults. When we see that, statistics show that Black children are charged as adults more often than white children. And so if we have I want to be clear, if we have predatory adults hanging around group homes, and unfortunately, I've seen this working in a group home, adults preying on young people to commit gun violent acts, sex works and all of those things, and because they feel like no one's going to look for them, no one's going to miss them, they have no family, no one loves them, then we have a problem.
Thank you for that, Victoria. And I know, Shawana, you also had a response that you wanted to share.
Yeah, one of the people in the chat had asked, I am looking at their questions. One of the people in the chat asked, what is the community and stakeholders and churches doing in regards to foster care and other issues? Well, I can't speak for every church and every community. I won't do that. But what I will say is, in the mass majority, nothing. Nothing is being done in churches. I don't see it. We are losing day community centers around the country. And so I cannot say that I've walked into places that are community stakeholders and that they're having conversations about foster care, or that they're setting up programs, or that they're opening up their churches or their community centers, and there's young people that get to have dialogue. I'm not seeing that. And I'm not saying it's not happening somewhere. I'm just saying, from New York to Detroit, it's not happening how it should, or at all. And I think, Isaac Scott had said something in his chat. Where are the young people who are in foster care being represented today? And that's a good question. And I would love to facilitate a conversation with young people, with anybody that's here or on the chat. I will definitely give you my email, because I would definitely like their voices. Without their voices, these are not balanced conversations. But guess what? I'm all for creating a conversation that totally includes them 100%.
We're having a lot of stuff going on in Ingham County, including increased gun violence. Victims, we know that there's someone who's a victim today may be the perpetrator tomorrow. There's so many reasons why people carry guns. There's so many reasons that the police are doing the really over policing that Victoria alluded to, that I'm trying to pull back on with some of my policies about traffic stops and what charges we will and will not issue. But there are some local groups, some local things that we're doing that may be able to be replicated. We have a W.K. Kellogg Foundation grant on truth, racial healing, and transformation, where we have different committees, different groups. We've had some pretty honest, open conversations. I've been working with the Vera Institute of Justice for about 2 years on looking at our own data. That's just as bad as we thought it was. It's not in the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system, unfortunately. We don't have access to that. But with our adult criminal system, all the things that we know are borne out in terms of how arrests are made, searches and seizures are made, what charges my office brings, and what happens in the system. So we're trying to work with the community and to say, listen, I'm the prosecutor and this sucks, but we're going to get better. Like, let's look at policies that people say, this we think will actually have a favorable impact, and then measure them and say, did it make a difference? So like on resisting and obstructing police officers, I changed a policy about 1.5 years ago, and we almost halved the charges. So that's when someone talks back to a police officer, it may be something more serious, and we do issue sometimes, but a lot of times it's just, ego issues with a police officer. You're stopped and you talk back, or you're not deferential enough, and next thing you're slammed on the ground and charged with resisting obstructing. So there are things that I think we can do if we identify with the community. What do you see as most troubling? What do you want me to do? I can't always do it, but at least we can listen to them and try to put those in place.
I was just going to say, I don't know, Shauna, I know we're getting short on time, and there was some call for young people and youth leadership. And I don't know if some of the questions that you had for Aishali, we could be sure sort of got out so that, there's a broader sharing.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So I wanted to ask Aishali, as with their work as a youth advocate, what are some of the policies that you've learned or heard of that you think would be best served for people who are in foster care, but generally youth in general?
You said policies?
Policies or initiatives or services, just things that you, in your experience, see that would better serve the youth and or those who are in foster care.
Well, we just got the credit transfer bill passed to make sure you finish school when you leave placements, like in placements, and their credits transfer when they come home from placements. We just got that transferred when we went to Harrisburg a few times to advocate for that bill. Access to mental health services when you first get into foster care. Mainly around a lot, just them around them two things, plus like employment and life skills, like opportunities.
Thank you. As we are coming down to the wire on time, the last question that I have for you all, given that a lot of our audiences are line prosecutors and officers across the country, what are some immediate action items that you think that they can move forward with in their respective offices to help youth who are in the criminal legal system and in the foster care system? So I will start with you, Prosecuting Attorney Seaman.
Well, first of all, like I've been hitting on, we need to be educated. We just need to know, and we need to make sure that our staff who works within the courts, the juvenile courts, our victim advocates, our support staff, to be honest. And I have hired former foster youth in those capacities in my office, partially for that reason. We need to make sure that we look at the patterns, not just what we see in our own office, but what we're identifying nationally. I was on our state's committee on juvenile justice for a while in the late 80s, early 90s. And that was Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, which looks at, juveniles being in the adult system, disproportionate minority contact, which is what we called it then, things like that. We need to be aware of the issues that, race, gender identity, the status of tribes with indigenous folks. There's so many areas where we just need to know more. When I came into office in 2017, I had the juveniles that were life without parole cases out of my county resentenced. They're both out. One is on parole right now. The other one has come off parole about a year ago. We need to look at our transfer or waiver policies to adult court. We need to really make sure we're looking at how the mitigating circumstances and how to talk, I think, to victims and survivors' families more effectively. I had the pleasure of going to Germany a couple of years ago and seeing their juvenile justice and prison system. And, ours is just appalling in comparison for all kinds of reasons. But they don't even charge anyone until they're 14 years old. Period. You cannot be charged with a crime. And there's a presumption up until, I think, about 19 or 20 that you're going to be handled in the juvenile system. It's almost unheard of to send a juvenile to the adult system. For adults, it's almost unheard of to even be, you're pretty serious to be charged with something at all. We know that with 5% of the world's population, we incarcerate 25% of the people incarcerated. We also know that with life without the possibility of parole for adults is about 60%. And for children, I don't think any place else that does like we do. So there are all kinds of places that as prosecutors, we have to be willing to pull in information. We have to get our defense bar to share more information with us. We just started a public defender's office about 2-3 years ago. I've been trying to get them to do mitigation documents for us to really give us, information that we need to have up front in adult and juvenile cases, that give us the kind of information about mental health status, about special needs, about intellectual functioning, about trauma history, all the things, what services have been provided in the past, the things we need to know as prosecutors to make our decisions, because we often have to make decisions very quickly about is someone detained or not? Do we send someone to the adult system or not? We need to have that information quickly. So that's, I guess, I'll stop now.
Susan?
Yeah, I mean, if there was one thing I could say to the prosecutors listening, it would be to listen to the voices of young people, to not, we all have to be very humble in this work. And even individuals who have, with system involvement can't speak for everyone, but they can certainly provide information so that prosecutors and others, people in the child welfare system who may be working with prosecutors, don't assume we have the answers or a great idea for reform. Those kinds of ideas need to come from the young people who are experiencing these systems and this trauma. And that's why I put the roadmap to reform in the chats. It's just a tool to help prompt those conversations. I don't know, Aishley, I feel like you should answer this question and I should just step back here. If there's one thing you can say to the people listening.
Yes. I feel like prosecutors should get to know the youth. We're all human beings at the end of the day. Don't just go off of what you think you know or what's written down. No one knows the youth more than the youth. Offer them more options other than immediately placing them. Advocate for kids and teens to get what they really need and ask for more information. Not just on the criminal act, but focus on the whole kid and what happened to them to actually make the best decision. Prison does not solve the issues of foster care or family needs. Also, kids act out in foster care from being separated from their family. We also need to understand that prosecution will never be able to be fully trauma informed and never will in court.
Thank you for that, Aishley. Victoria?
No, I'm sorry. I think I had like more of a statement. I got a little distracted. Come back to me in a second.
Okay, then Shawana.
Okay, thank you guys. So I like numbers because numbers matter. 80% of individuals who are incarcerated have had impact with the foster care system. That's an atrocity. 60% of youth earn income below poverty, and it leads us to prison. Foster kids, 25% will end up in prison within 2 years of emancipation. That's unacceptable. And those are the numbers. So I currently, they say do what you can where you can. So I am a grassroots activist who truly believes in grassroots movements. And now I believe in legislation, because without it, we can't really change the needle. So I currently have the only mass incarceration mental health bill called post-traumatic prison disorder, Shawana W76337. I'm calling for trauma-informed therapists. I'm calling for psychosocial evaluations. I'm calling for guards to be mandated to therapy because they create harm. I'm asking in legislation that we talk about reducing aging prisoner population because it's an atrocity. What I'm getting ready to talk about on Thursday is foster care legislation, which is the Albert Phillips foster care bill. My father was an excellent foster parent. He was a detective and a farmer, and he tried to help other people's children and his community. And I believe that we have exacerbated foster care with no rules. And somebody in the chat talked about money and how the foster child never sees the money. And I'm asking for 5% of the foster care checks to go in trust for the children. So when they turn 18, they are not broke. I'm asking for mandated Section 8 or a housing voucher on their 17th birthday. I'm calling for trauma-informed therapists the day you put them in foster care. And I'm calling for reunifications to be no longer than 1 year. Listen, there's no need to send a parent to alcohol, anger management, and none of those are their issues. If they got their child taken for neglect, figure out what the neglect was and get to the business. How do we keep kids in the home? We take kids out of homes and we pay people to watch them and we don't have any knowledge of who they are. That's unacceptable. How can we keep children at home? If it's foster, if it's food, if it's therapist, we have all these tools in place after you take them. I want to put all these tools in place before they ever leave home, because foster care is not a place. And because I was born in prison and my mother was in prison and I was in foster care, we don't have any unit family bonding when it comes to foster care. We send babies over here, we send big kids over here, and parents are nowhere. It has to be mandated. If your mother or your father is incarcerated, if the state took you, the state is obligated to keep your family bond. And I know that does not happen. So I'm going to make it mandatory that they make sure these children are interacting with their parent. I don't care if their parent is in prison or the psych ward. You can't, there's some bonds that you should not be able to break. I met my siblings sitting in church and I was screaming because I did not know they existed. That's unacceptable. So I'm calling for sibling bonds. I think that should never be out of court paperwork. And I think if the system took them, there should be a way for you to know who each other is and stay together and not separated house to house and group home to play. No, this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And so I'm calling on legislators. I'm calling on legislators. I wrote legislation and I want them to pick it up in New York and in Michigan and definitely in the state of California that exacerbated all my ACEs, because there has to be an accountability factor. And I'm asking for community oversight, like Carol, like Miss Susan, like Victoria. I'm calling for clergy. There has to be an oversight committee to monitor the foster care worker and the child. And there has to be a middle person to take the grievances. And because we write bills and we don't know what happens, I'm asking for the Senate and the Assembly every year for the data to oversight what happened in the criminal legal system. I was released from foster care in prison. That's unacceptable. The lady said, "Oh, I didn't know where you were." Well, how did you lose me? My paperwork said Foster Youth of California transferred the Department of Corrections in California. I wasn't lost, but where did you drop the ball? And so my legislation is one drop in the bucket to many more things that need to happen. And so I'm grateful for Victoria. I'm grateful for John Jay. I'm grateful for Carol. I had the opportunity to hear Carol a couple of months ago in Lansing at a Lifer rally. And I resonated with her changes and with the stuff that she said and the fact that she owns we didn't get it right. I'm okay with people saying they didn't get it right, but how are we going to make it better? And so I'm so grateful for this conversation today. And
What
that John Jay, go ahead.
I'm bad at that. What oversight looks like is really important, though. So I worked at the Department of Human Services, now the Human Health and Human Services in Michigan, during the time we came under a federal consent decree in 2008 for our foster care system. The state is still under that consent decree. And you know, I had gone to a lot of the hearings in the federal district court. I can't say that the foster care system investigation, CPS investigations, et cetera, are better, right? So that's a kind of oversight. Children's Rights, which was a New York group, filed against our state. We also have Foster Care Review Board, which we've had since the 70s or so, and that only handles a few cases. It can provide a difference in some, but it's not an effective oversight. We have the Office of Children's Ombudsman, which in individual cases can create some policy change or even legislative change, but again, it's not enough. So, and none of us as individuals have the time or whatever. So we have to figure out what a structure would look like that there's actually effective oversight and that it involves all the necessary voices, the people impacted, the parents, the children, as young adults and others. And, you know, not just another pro forma group, because we have too many of those.
say
Thank
that
you, Shawana and Carol. Very important points that were made. Victoria, I'm going to give you the last word.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate all of that was said. And I, like Shawana had touched on something that I almost like forgot to expound on, and it's the sibling relationship. It is extremely important that siblings remain together. The one thing that foster care did do for myself and my two siblings after my mom died, she died when I was 9, was kept us together. She, I'm not really sure if she put in her will or what she put in, but whatever it was, the foster care sister honored it and they didn't separate us. And that was like the best thing they could have done, because when my brother was killed by the police, I was satisfied that I had that relationship with him to continue to fight for him. Otherwise, I would not have ever known, and he just would have been an unknown name who was not fought for, and he would have been forgotten about. So I definitely believe that keeping siblings together is very important. I do know that there are issues that arise where that is not possible. But even if it's minimal interaction, let siblings handle what siblings need to handle. They'll figure it out, right? And lastly, I just wanted to state that, like, I just wanted to state, I don't know why I said it. I just wanted to state that my organization, Sisters of Justice, we're currently working on asking adults to sign on as mentors for children, like lifelong mentors. Sometimes, like in our case, we have very little family, and having mentors and people show up and be there and commit to be there. Being in foster care creates unnecessary abandonment issues. You don't know when people are going to go. Moving from foster home to foster home, being woken up in the middle of the night and you're like disoriented and you don't know where you're going, and there's someone standing over you with your bags already packed, and you wake up the next morning afraid inside of another apartment, right? And you don't know where you are, you don't know what state you're in, you don't know what county you're in, what street you're on, you know nothing. You're holding your pee for like a half an hour, you're afraid, you don't know who's on the other side of that door, right? So like that, giving foster youth more agency, right? And allowing an adult that they trust, which is usually like a mentor, to explain what this is going to look like. You're going to be in this home. This is not your forever home. And at some point, someone may come to pick you up. I have brain farts about how it felt like I knew how to, like, what is it called? Not transport, like, what is it? When you just like, show up somewhere, like you was at one place and you like that's
Teleport.
Teleport, right? So I felt like I was teleporting, right? So I wake up and I'm like, oh, where am I? What is this? Where am I? Who are these people? That is the scariest feeling in the whole entire world. You hear voices on the other side of the door. You're scared to open the door. You're scared to ask for food. You're scared to ask to just pee because you were sleeping all night, right? And you know, these things sound really strange, but it is a reality because someone came in the middle of the night, packed up all of your things. You don't even know if all of your things are there. And as an adult, you become very protective of your things because all of those things were taken away from you and you've lost so much stuff along the way. And so asking people to sign on as adult mentors, even if it's check-ins, callings, and asking people if they're okay, linking them to resources and services. And lastly, one thing that we're implementing right away is something called positive parenting. I've enlisted a group of people who are committed to teaching parenting. Oftentimes, foster youth meet other foster youth, right? Because they have shared experiences, and they have children with other foster youth, right? And we have never seen what parenting actually looks like. We've seen what foster care looks like, but we've never seen what parenting looks like. And then it's on us to get that right, or we are threatened by other systems, like especially the education system, the medical system, with having our own children being taken away. So then we become highly protective of our own children. Like I protest with my kids. I don't allow people to watch my children because I'm so protective, because I don't want anyone to take them from me at all, like to take them anywhere. And I don't think my kids have ever even been to a babysitter before. And, you know, these are just our realities. And that's it.
Thank you, Victoria. Honestly, thank you, all of you, for this incredible conversation. I know I learned a lot, and I'm already getting messages that so many people really appreciated this conversation. I hope we can continue it in some form. Thank you again for taking the time today, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, guys.